later soon. So welcome to our virtual breakfast talk on preparing for environmental hazards. We have a fabulous presentation prepared today. I'm Catherine Fullerton, the supervising planner in the Department of Planning and Land Use. The Planning Board holds these educational talks in the interest of creating a relationship with the municipalities within the county and to foster cooperation. We are joined by several members of the County Planning Board. The chair is Carol Hoffman. We are all very pleased that you were able to join us this morning. This program, obviously, is being recorded, and we will make it available to those who registered later. We also have in attendance the manager of the Office of Local Government Assistance at DEP, Kiona Miller. Please post any questions you have for the speakers in the chat box. We will review the questions at the end of the session. We have a very full presentation, so specific questions will need to be addressed offline. Our first presenter will be Nick Angerone. Nick Angerone is New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer and manager of the DEP Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. And as Chief Resilience Officer, Nick coordinates statewide resilience policy and serves as Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, providing technical guidance and support to local governments in their efforts to address the impacts of climate change. And let me get the slides up for you. You should be seeing that.
All right. Good morning, everybody. As Kate said, I'm Nick Angerone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer. No need to reiterate my introduction, so we will get right into it. I wear, as Kate mentioned, I wear two hats as kind of both as the Chief Resilience Officer for the state, which entails different aspects, which I'll go into, as well as multiple programs at DEP, including the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning, the Coastal Management Program, and the Blue Acres Program, to name a few. The position of Chief Resilience Officer was established by Governor Murphy's Executive Order 89 back in 2019. And aside from establishing the position of Chief Resilience Officer and establishing the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, it also directed us to do a number of things. Kate, go ahead with the next slide.
Right.
The first of those kind of checklist items, if you will, was to develop a scientific report on climate change. Right, this is a landmark report for the state of New Jersey that really took that global and national and even regional issue of climate change and brought it to our backyards with New Jersey specific information. It is a comprehensive document that is well worth you taking a look at. It remains the most important and comprehensive source of climate science information for the state. We've updated our understanding of climate impacts in New Jersey multiple times since then, including our extreme precipitation projections and the impacts of climate change on human health and communities. We issued an addendum on community health in partnership with DOH, which again has expanded our understanding of the impacts, not just on the usual how hot is it going to get, or how wet, or who's going to get wet and what's going to get wet, but really what are the impacts going to be to our communities and our families and friends and neighbors. Right, this information is critical as the state starts to take action to build our infrastructure, develop our communities, and connect with our with the citizens of the state. Go ahead, Kate. The next major deliverable stemming from Executive Order 89 was New Jersey's statewide climate change resilience strategy. Right, the strategy serves as a framework, a policy framework for New Jersey state departments and agencies, and it goes into essentially 127 different recommendations and actions across 6 priority areas. Just to name them very quickly for you so you can see the breadth of the issue, right, is building resilient and healthy communities, the resilience of New Jersey's ecosystems, coordinated governance, investment in information and public understanding, climate-informed investments, and innovative financing. And there's also a focus on the coastal zone as a coastal resilience plan. What you're seeing on your screen, though, is also something that was very important for New Jersey, and this is that the strategy defined what climate resilience means for the state. And if you're kind of in this field regularly, you kind of might recognize here that this is really a melding of the definitions of resilience and adaptation, right? And it is meant to indicate that not only does New Jersey intend to kind of bounce back after an event, but also to make sure that we are bouncing forward and improve our ability to respond and decrease the damage from these increasing climate events. Go ahead, Kate. The strategy was released 2 years ago this past October. And so kind of I don't want to say celebrate the anniversary of that, but based on that 2-year anniversary, the Interagency Council released a 2-year accomplishments report, which highlighted the state agencies' climate resilience success stories. It is not intended to be comprehensive, but it does showcase over 40 actions that state agencies have taken over the last 2 years to adapt and respond to climate change. Again, it is worth taking a look at this so you can it's worth understanding kind of the various kind of places that different state agencies are. Some of us are, the state DEP is taking any number of significant efforts to move the ball forward, some of which you will hear about today. And then there are other state agencies who are kind of taking their first steps here. And it's important to recognize kind of we're all in different places as we move forward. Go ahead, Kate. Over the last year, the Interagency Council has been working to develop a resilience action plan on extreme heat. Now, the difference here is whereas the statewide strategy kind of was a high level strategic policy document, this resilience action plan goes deeper and identifies specific actions that state agencies are going to take to address the increasing extreme heat that we are all seeing. Go ahead, Kate. Uh, New Jersey has developed what we refer to as a heat hub, where kind of all of our data and guidance it lives, right, all in one place for you to be able to find that information and learn about the issue. I will point specifically right now to a survey on Heat Hub, specifically around cooling centers, which we'd very much like to hear from you all. Go ahead, Kate. All right. The other primary part of my job is working directly with communities, right? Providing them the technical assistance and resources to make informed decisions, understanding the impacts of climate change that we are already experiencing and which we will see going forward. This comes in any number of ways, but is largely kind of fits under the umbrella, if you will, of our Resilient NJ program. And Resilient NJ is it has a number of aspects to it, right? The most significant of them has been a regional planning initiative, and this was funded through HUD's Natural Disaster Resilience Competition, and has funded the development of 4 multi-municipal regional action plans in 4 areas across the state, totaling 24 municipalities. The second aspect of this is a municipal focused program, right? We don't have the significant resources that we necessarily need to do kind of multi-municipal, comprehensive, multi-year planning processes. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to provide assistance to directly to municipalities. We also recognize that we don't have resources to fund this work in 564 individual municipalities in New Jersey. And so we also developed a climate change toolkit, which is really aimed at helping our municipalities conduct their own resilience planning. Go ahead, Kate. So Resilient NJ and all of those aspects continues to advance, and we're constantly looking for various sources of funding to support those efforts. We're continuing to support the work of those four regions. Um, you know, the, the the four regions are kind of the flagship of the initiative, and right now we're trying to ensure that we don't just develop the plan and walk away. We're continuing to provide that assistance to these local governments, and not only that, move them from planning to implementation. And I'm quite proud to note in one of those plans up in the Northeast New Jersey region, that's Newark, Hoboken, Jersey City, and Bayonne. They've, based on the plan developed through Resilient NJ, we brought in over $20 million in FEMA brick funding to implement aspects of that plan. That's exactly how we want this to work. We set it up, we provide the capacity and resources to develop the plans and move them into implementation. Additionally, we're again kind of scrounging for every dollar we can here. We're using coastal management funding to do some resilience planning down in 11 Burlington County municipalities. We have some corporate business tax funding, which we're using to fund planning in 5 more communities. And you will see early in 2024 an additional announcement to recreate or spread the regional planning program into other parts of the state. Go ahead, Kate. Right, so you're also surely all aware that 2 years ago, New Jersey amended the municipal land use law, which now requires municipalities to incorporate a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. That just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Into their master plans. And so, this is effectively requires municipalities to do some level of risk and vulnerability assessment, do a build out analysis, and then identify master plan appropriate actions that they will take based on that assessment. DEP, my office, is in place and ready to provide some level of assistance as towns go through that process. Kate, go ahead. And one of the resources to do that is the toolkit which I referenced. The toolkit is kind of lays out a logical resilience planning process, right? And it seeks to, and what it does under each of the kind of the steps of that process is provide kind of the informational and decision-making resources for local governments to kind of take this action on their own. It is written for what I like to inform or consider the informed volunteer, right? So that's your planning board members, your environmental commission members, right? You shouldn't need to hire $1 million consultant to do this work. And you should be able to use this toolkit to go through that process and develop a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment that both meets the requirements of the municipal land use law and kind of really establishes a solid framework and decision-making information for you to move to a more resilient future. Go ahead, Kate. Finally, the Blue Acres program, which I think hopefully you're all at least generally familiar with, right? Blue Acres has been around since 1995. It's been historically a reactive program, right? Buying out properties kind of after they've been flooded. That is a critical and important tool in our kind of disaster recovery and resilience planning toolbox. Blue Acres has purchased over 1,000 homes since 1995. It has purchased over 800 homes since Sandy. It is a national model, recognized as a best practice for buyout programs, and it's something that we're quite proud of. However, we are looking to evolve the program a bit, right? And we acknowledge that it's a better idea, better solution to kind of get people out of harm's way before they lose their homes and all of their belongings. And so, we're trying to evolve the program a bit here, and also include it and make the connections to our planning efforts. Right? It's not just the individual homeowners who are directly impacted by Blue Acres, but when we buy out properties in a community, the entire community is impacted. So we want them to understand kind of both what the impacts to their community will be, but also to try and view that the post buyout properties as an asset to their community, right? And provide some level of input and kind of forward thinking about what that property can be, what that land can be, right? It's important to note that Blue Acres is a purely voluntary process, um, where we work with residential homeowners who are interested. It is funded through various federal and state sources, and all of which have their own requirements. But we're very successful at kind of piecing that together, and we have multiple multi-million dollar federal awards and state awards that'll be going to support significantly our IDA impacted communities over the next year or so. And with that, I will be done. Kate, you can just go to the last slide there. But thank you, everybody. I'm happy to take questions, Kate, however and whenever you have that set up.
Right. And so toward the end, we'll get into Katie's session next. Katie Angrone is the Assistant Commissioner from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for Watershed and Land Management, and oversees the Division of Watershed Protection and Restoration, the Division of Land Resource Protection, and the Division of Resilience, Engineering, and Construction. Before becoming an Assistant Commissioner, Katie served as Associate Commissioner for Science and Policy, where she managed science, environmental health, and economic analysis programs while developing policy protective of New Jersey's environment and public health. A passionate advocate of the environment, Katie is dedicated to DEP's mission to protect the environment and public health in service to the people of New Jersey. And we'll roll along to Katie's session.
Thank you, Kate. That was very kind. And thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And a really important part of my role at DEP is to work with communities to take the steps necessary to become more resilient by improving water quality and reducing flooding, among other things. And really, there's a range of ways that communities can achieve their resilience and environmental goals that have a nexus with my work, all the way from planning to projects that are sometimes really quite big with the Army Corps. But increasingly, we're finding that all communities are grappling with a changing climate and the impacts that it brings. And it's becoming even more important to build local capacity in conversations like today to reduce and respond to those impacts. So that's really what I'll cover today, how we are helping at DEP communities to that end. Kate, next slide. All right, but before we talk about the impacts, I think it's really important to kind of pause and comprehensively understand the reasons that we mitigate risk. Of course, all of us, we want to keep people safe. That's in all of our missions. But at DEP, as we form policy, we're also making sure that we understand the economics of mitigating risk. And we've been monitoring this for a while now. And I have to say that the developments in this field are kind of dizzying. They're rapidly evolving. Just a few years ago, we heard from the insurance and investment stakeholders that they were interested in understanding a community's risk. And fast forward to today, bond issuers are actually explicitly asking governments about risk. And entities that are planning and mitigating for it are seeing increased bond ratings. So that's what we're seeing on the ground. But the high-level takeaways from the economic literature are that climate change is creating systemic financial risks for individuals, businesses, municipalities, and really New Jersey as a whole. And the private financial markets, the federal agencies, foreign regulators, and others are all working to understand and mitigate that risk. And we can see that the financial impacts of climate change are already being felt. For example, impacts like flooding, whether nuisance or storm related, can lead to a decline of a community as homes and businesses struggle to recover, and business is interrupted, and unfortunately, some are even abandoned. So it's not hard to see that the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of prudent action. And we can also see that climate adaptation is often cost effective. Floodproofing and building to an elevated standard, for example, costs much less than repeatedly repairing a flood damaged home. Not to mention the emotional toll that you heard Nick speak about, and that can be really devastating to both a family and a community. So while we act to keep people safe, there's this enormous co-benefit of ensuring that our communities continue to thrive economically. Next slide, Kate. So you heard about the broader scale of impacts and resilience planning from the Chief Resilience Officer, but I want to talk a little bit about the water-specific hazards and what DEP is doing to plan and mitigate for those impacts at a watershed scale. So water impacts include, as you would imagine, drought, increased harmful algal blooms, waterborne illnesses, increases in invasive species. All of those can impact your drinking water. And perhaps most notably for this region, increased extreme rain events. Next slide, Kate. So today, I will focus on the actions we're taking really together to reduce impacts from these issues in particular. And you can read all about them in the climate science report and the health addendum that Nick referred to. But I want to highlight a subsequent precipitation study. Now, it might surprise you to learn that across the nation, people are designing their stormwater infrastructure and drawing their floodplains using data that has not been updated since 1999. So in New Jersey, we knew that we could do better. The targets are moving, and if we don't build our infrastructure for those new targets, let alone today's, well, we're essentially creating a problem for our emergency planners and our communities. So I just want to pause here and briefly share an anecdote to underscore this point. I'm sure many of you have done tabletop exercises for flooding catastrophes. I certainly have. And some of them involve the Delaware. And in those exercises, it's always evident that New Jersey's ahead of the curve. As we try to anticipate flooded damage on both sides of the river, I am seriously thankful to the New Jersey policymakers who had the foresight to adopt a statewide flood protection program in New Jersey. So in the spirit of prudent planning, a few years ago, we asked researchers from NOAA's Northeast Climate Center at Cornell to bring our rainfall data up to date and to go a step further to develop projections about increased rainfall going forward. Next slide, Kate. So this study indicates that under a moderate emissions scenario, the 100-year 24-hour storm is expected to increase from the 1999 baseline by 2100, as shown on this screen. And projected changes in the northern part of the state, you can see here, will be much greater than the southern and coastal areas. So, you can see 42% is Hunterdon County. And as you get further up into New Jersey, it could be as much as 50% for those extreme rain events. So this means that storms will drop large amounts of water over shorter periods of time. Some of you might already accurately be feeling like we're already experiencing these events. And as you can imagine, more extreme events will mean more chances for flooding and increased runoff associated with pollution to occur. So local governments need to plan for these events, whether that's storing the sawhorses close to the roads that need to close, applying for grants to retrofit inadequate basins, or understanding whether your emergency services need water rescue training or high water vehicles. Next slide, Kate. So now that we understand why we're working to plan and mitigate, let's just talk a little bit about addressing climate threats, including stormwater, fluvial, even tidal, and water quality impacts of increased runoff, which include things like harmful algal blooms, which I mentioned before, can become a drinking water contamination issue. So we've got some some irons in the fire. We've got the municipal separate storm sewer permits. You may have heard of them, MS4, and those require permittees to understand their assets and their water quality impairments and to start to take local action to maintain their systems and furthermore to reduce non-point source pollution. In July, we adopted the Inland Flood Protection Rule, which amended our stormwater and the rules governing building in floodplains to incorporate the best available projections for future flooding and rainfall. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this month or next, we will be proposing the NJ Pact rule, which will also begin to address redevelopment in an effort to improve flooding and water quality. That's comprised in areas where water is not managed or inadequately managed. And that's something that we've never done before. Of course, those rules will also address coastal flooding, but that's not particularly germane to this group. We are also working on Watershed NJ, which is a web platform that we're building with stakeholders like you to be a user-friendly way to understand the health of one's watershed and also to identify stressors and opportunities for restorations. And as Nick mentioned, we're really trying to reach down into the voluntary population. We want to reach open space committees, shade tree committees, everyone who makes a decision that does impact flooding or water quality, even if they don't know it. That's who we're trying to get at the table with Watershed NJ. And naturally, none of this work can be done without support. So we also offer grants and loans and technical assistance, and I'll try to touch on that as we continue. Next slide. So first, we're working with communities to improve their stormwater management for both today and the future. And one step really builds on the other here. Stormwater is, in my opinion, one of the truly orphaned utilities in the state. It's not centrally owned typically. It's not centrally maintained or operated like drinking water or wastewater infrastructure. And despite this, we've sort of been able to limp along to now. But now our rainfall patterns are changing. And we routinely close streets, and we have increased water rescues, and properties are flooding that haven't before. So the infrastructure that's unable to manage intense rain events, and in some cases, it even fails catastrophically. So we need to adapt how we manage our stormwater to meet this moment and to be ready for the future. Next slide, Kate. So where do we start? The first step in managing anything at all is to understand it. You need an inventory before you can assess vulnerability or do anything else. And it's pretty challenging to operate and maintain and generally manage stormwater if you don't know where your stormwater infrastructure is or where it isn't for that matter. So while previous MS4 permits have required the mapping of outfalls, the new permit that came out this January requires the mapping and inventory of all stormwater assets. And permittees were offered grants for this work. And the grant process was literally the simplest one ever. Are you a permittee? Yes, here you go. You get a check. So I'll just a quick commercial that those grants are closing in December. And at last count, there was 100 permittee that had not claimed their money. Really, seriously, the easiest grant money ever. Also, the inventory, I think, it becomes just the foundation for everything. It helps with problem identification. For example, do you have an intersection that flash floods with stormwater? You really need that inventory to diagnose the issue. And these are things that I think both Watershed NJ, the MS4 permit, and also the Watershed Improvement Plan required pursuant to MS4 will start to facilitate. So understanding which areas in your watershed are undermanaged or unmanaged will also help you engineer solutions, right? Because we didn't have stormwater rules before 1984. So there are inevitably portions of each jurisdiction that are not managed adequately. And an inventory also allows you to prioritize your resources and I think do emergency planning for spills, for flooding. And this is where I think there's a nexus with the hazard mitigation planning that you'll hear about as well. And the fact that all communities across New Jersey are doing this work together at the same time, I think also provides an opportunity for us to identify some issues that might originate outside of your area and therefore call for a regional solution. Next slide. Okay, so then you've got to plan and act, and we've got to do this by identifying areas where we can do better. Are there areas where you can acquire or restore, retrofit and naturalize basins, remove impervious, plant trees or vegetation to stop erosion, remove pollutants and slow runoff? And again, this is where the amended stormwater rules and the MS4 watershed improvement plans will come in. Localized flooding that costs our communities so much is reduced when those or undermanaged areas are addressed. And by addressing water impairments, we're really going to reduce waterborne illnesses and other threats to drinking water, like harmful algal blooms, which, by the way, the cyanotoxins can get pulled through the groundwater. We have recently seen that in the northern parts of the state, that cyanotoxins are being pulled into wells that are poorly constructed adjacent to waterways with blooms. So as we take all these actions, we need to make sure that we're designing for tomorrow, that we're building it for tomorrow, and using the best available data. Otherwise, we're building solutions with short-term expiration dates and deferring costs that will only increase as time passes. So, another quick anecdote on tough choices today that pay dividends tomorrow. We recently updated our dam safety standards or evaluated them rather, to see if our requirements for the highest hazard dams in the state were still protective given the predicted rainfall. And the good news is they are. But somewhere along the line, someone took the bold step of being conservative when it came to protecting populations near these dams. And I've recently found myself in a few press interviews that were spurred by catastrophic dam failures in jurisdictions that did not have that foresight. So I really believe that we are at a very similar moment here right now with respect to our flood and our stormwater rules. And I am glad to say that we are choosing to protect our communities into the future. We are not kicking the can down the road. We are investing now to be prepared for tomorrow. And again, we're seeing that bond issuers are taking notice. Next slide. So addressing stormwater is just part of the picture. We've also got a plan for increased fluvial floods as a result of increased runoff. Next slide. So we needed to address how and where we build in floodplains. And New Jersey, as I said, has statewide rules. We're very lucky, and we have had them for quite some time. Along with the Department of Community Affairs Uniform Construction Code, these rules are FEMA's minimum national flood insurance program standards. And our collective goal is to keep people out of harm's way to the extent possible and to reduce flood damage. Next slide. So to do that, we currently regulate this area. Next slide. We've recently amended our flood hazard rules in the Inland Flood Protection Rule to consider future flood projections for new development and certain redevelopment to ensure that we are doing everything we can to protect property and life as water courses respond to climate change. And I have to say that other jurisdictions in the country and at the federal level are starting to follow suit. Under these rules, local governments in particular will be asked to do what they can to ensure that infrastructure like roads, bridges, stormwater basins, and critical buildings are constructed with the future in mind. Now, just recently, DEP was asked to waive standards to allow for the construction of a new police station somewhere else in the state in an area that cannot be accessed during a flood. And our rules generally prohibit that. They prohibit it for multifamily residences and critical buildings in areas where emergency services cannot access during a flood. And unfortunately, by the time sometimes these projects get to us, they're often baked. Next slide. So this is really where county and local governments can help, because frankly, no one understands better where flood impacts are happening in your community. So we'd ask you to assess the vulnerability and do it in several different ways. But in particular, I encourage municipalities and counties, as part of your hazard mitigation planning or your emergency management planning or your climate vulnerability assessment, whichever suits, to map out your vulnerable areas. And then to really analyze the trends in your own data, whether that's complaints, water rescues, or where you put out the sawhorses, and start to track that. We ask you to take that information then and plan. Not only will this help you when you're asking for training and equipment, But if you take the time to coordinate with other local departments, it will, I think, inform other important decisions. It will help the planning and zoning boards make land use decisions. It will help open space committee decide where to buy parcels to reduce flooding, right? In the 90s, we talked about the green belt. We now need a blue belt to help us reduce flooding. Sometimes those funds need to be spent outside your borders upstream on a water course. And it will also help your DPW and transportation departments to understand where to invest in infrastructure upgrades. And then we need you to act. Whatever hazard you're seeking to address, whether it's flooding or heat, there are bound to be co-benefits associated with the actions. Take, for example, green infrastructure and other nature-based solutions that are designed to address flooding and water quality, but they also provide a sense of place, clean the air, provide localized cooling, improved recreation. Trees and green spaces are known in the literature to improve mental health and quality of life. And removing impervious surfaces offers many of the same benefits. Also, resilient roads and bridges reduce business interruption, minimize your emergency response, and reduce climate anxiety as people feel safer. And what's great is that you don't have to take all this on alone. You should consider working with partners. Regional planning, I think, is quite important. I have watched as Maryland paid Philadelphia to do something to improve the water quality coming down. So regional solutions are probably a nice way to share the burden. Next slide, Kate. All right, and finally, you can't take any of this on without tools and resources. So that's why we're asking for your input on that important platform, Watershed NJ. We are trying to build an accessible platform, and if it's not useful to your DPW, Open Space Committee, or Planning Board, then we have missed the mark. So please stay tuned for opportunities to tell us how to build that. And we're already supporting many communities as well by establishing a sustained mechanism to manage their stormwater, by forming a stormwater utility, by offering skilled technical assistance for feasibility studies. And finally, over the last years, we have literally given out millions in grants and loans to improve New Jersey's water quality and reduce flooding. And you should stay tuned in the next month or so for some more opportunities. So thank you for lending me your ear. And I look forward to questions.
Excellent. So our next slide and final presenter is Mitzi Kaira. She is the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Emergency Response and Planning Unit for the Emergency Management Program of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Mitzi currently serves as a manager who supports the coordination of the department with local, county, state, federal, and critical infrastructure sector partners for all threats and all hazards, natural or human caused, across all phases of emergency management, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. She has 29 years of experience operating in various disciplines of the emergency services fields. And we are ready for Mitzi.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us to your meeting. I know it took a little bit to coordinate schedules, but we managed to do it. So I'm happy to be able to meet with you guys. You heard from Nick and Katie as far as from the department's policy and regulatory and the funding that gets leveraged aspect of it. I'm looking at it from the emergency management perspective. So as far as emergency preparedness, what kind of tools and resources, what are the overlaps that you have between, say, planning committees or commissions, environmental commissions, and the emergency management piece? The folks that, when there's an incident, we get the significant rainfall or snowstorm or, an accident, and then there's some type of a spill or a release, whether it's, to the waterways or up in the air, what do we need to do? So I know you have, Hunterdon County has some great resources already available, posted on your webpage. Also, GIS-wise, saw some great maps with the county hazard mitigation plan. So I know you guys have that information down. It's just, again, knowing what's in your jurisdiction, whether it's at the county level or the municipal level, and planning appropriately. Again, you have the resiliency aspect of it, looking at what's, long term that can be done. And then the other aspect is when things happen, how do we deal with the planning for that now? One of the things you'll find if the PowerPoint gets distributed, at least my section, I embedded links to resources, websites, and stuff. So for this map image, there's a link there that will take you to the DEP's OpenGIS data source page, where if there are other data layers, I know we have GIS on here, representation. If there are additional data layers that might be useful or might have been updated, use the presentation as a reference point, if you will. So continue on, next slide. So again, we look at this from all hazards, all phases of emergency management. You heard from Nick and Katie with the recovery and mitigation aspect, and a lot of the coordination that happens, on that piece of it. For preparing, we look at a lot of planning on emergencies, emergency planning. Once you get that together, you need to train folks so people understand what that is, and conduct exercises or drills so that way you can test the plan and see, does it work? Is it feasible? And if not, make appropriate changes to that. And you also involve the community so that way they're aware of what the county or municipalities thoughts are with, if there's a significant snowfall, what are we doing? Closing buildings, closing schools, that kind of thing. And then the other piece is when something happens, the response aspect. So, we focus on life safety, incident stabilization, preserving, and then, dealing with the aftermath as we move towards recovery. Next slide. In the state hazard mitigation plan, you'll see natural hazards and human caused hazards. There are, the 22 of those in the state hazard mitigation plan. With regard to Hunterdon's, those are highlighted there. So, a little different, but these are the items that you guys focused on and said, these are the ones that are significant within our community. So obviously, we've seen a lot of these things over the years. You don't like to see it, but it has happened at some point in time. It's a matter of identifying the ones that happen the most frequently and planning for those, because they're going to happen at some point relatively frequently. So, whether it's the floods, nor'easters, severe weather, drought, these are all things, we plan for. Next slide. But the other piece of it is in New Jersey, how do we go and coordinate that aspect? If there's an incident that gets called in, whether it's from the public or responders coming into our DEP hotline, that can be coordinated across multiple call centers. So whether somebody calls 911, whether it's being reported through the National Response Coordination Center at the federal level, again, to make sure that all levels of response agencies are aware of it and responding if they need to. So that's the piece where you have notifications that go on both internally within an agency and also externally with response partners. For DEP, we have duty officers, depending on where that incident needs to be referred. That individual has the responsibility to verify and collect information and figure out what kind of resources are needed. Then you have the responders or boots on the ground out in the field at the local county level. You may need to have the state and federal folks come out and potentially contractors that are engaged. So whether it's a large motor vehicle accident on 78 or 31, or whether it's a large warehouse fire somewhere in Hunterdon County that requires additional resources. in putting all of that together, there's a framework with the incident command system that you develop either incident command or unified command if you have additional agencies that are part of that process. And that's kind of your local incident gets handled day to day. When you have stuff that elevates to a much larger event, longer duration, the picture on the right kind of starts to trickle over into that, where if there are additional resources needed, all incidents happen locally, but you might need to get help from your neighboring municipalities, from counties. There may need to be mutual aid, obtained, other partners that are out there. How do we get the people and the things needed to help with the incident? A lot of that comes through requests that are elevated through from local county to the state. If the state can handle the resource request, then the assistance or support is provided. If needed, additional technical support or resources are needed, it gets elevated up to bring federal assistance in. So think of a large warehouse fire. If we need to provide air monitoring resources that exceed what the locals, the county, and the state has, then okay, let's engage and bring in EPA, or potentially engage a contractor. So it's just that kind of a perspective. Next slide. Again, at the state level, all those different state agencies all have emergency management counterparts. We work together on a regular basis, meet regularly, again, coordinating with our federal partners in the county and local OEMs, just to make sure that, when we do have an incident at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's not the first time that you're meeting or reaching out to one another. And, we know where to go, who to reach out to in another agency to coordinate with our external partners, but also understand who we need to reach to internally. Next slide. For DEP emergency management, again, at the state level, the framework is set up by emergency support function. So for DEP, we have emergency support function 3, which is public works and engineering. So obviously you have your DPW personnel in county and local levels. We also look at critical infrastructure, debris management, and potential demolition if there are structures that are unsafe. We also have support function 10, which is hazardous materials. So again, if there's some type of a release, chemical release or spill that needs to be coordinated across response partners, that's how that happens at the state level. We also coordinate with folks internally. They're the subject matter experts, so similar to who you go to within, whether it's a drinking water issue, a dam issue, a chemical facility issue. It's getting to the right person to provide that expertise. Have the communication center. So when the 877 Warren DEP hotline is called, we have the operators. It's 24/7, 365, who answer the phone, take the information down, refer it to the appropriate person or program within the department for appropriate follow-up. And then we also have the planning, response, and recovery piece of this when there is an incident, making sure that we cover all aspects of emergency management. Next slide. So again, within DEP, we have a lot of subject matter experts, a lot of programs. For emergency management, we're not the expert on everything, but we have to know who to go to. So whether it's regulatory guidance, whether it's emergency authorizations or waivers, enforcement discretion in order to facilitate response or recovery at the municipal or county level. Think back to whether it was Ida, if there were roads washed out, trying to, restore, roadways so that you could still have folks move through on major roadways. Thinking along like Route 29 and, other areas, 31. Even more recently, earlier this year, with the water, the rain and flooding that impacted up in Warren County, across Route 46 and other side roads there. Again, knowing which programs to go to provide that assistance to restore infrastructure. So the links are embedded here that take you directly to, say, go-to pages within the department's webpage. So for drinking water, if that gets clicked on, it'll take you right to their emergency response and preparedness page. For water main break guidance, what kind of advisories, whether it's a boil water, do not drink, do not use advisory, who to coordinate with, that kind of guidance. If you go back, so each of those takes you to different links. If you click also on the environmental justice, I'll take environmental justice for 400, please. Down to the right. Environmental justice is one of those, focus topics, if you will, within to understand who's impacted and where, what concerns there are, if there isn't what's called an overburdened community or underserved community. If you scroll down, the department had put together an environmental justice map. So it's a tool in order to assist identifying those kinds of communities and what the criteria are for that. So again, providing those links so that way, for your planners, whether you're, part of the planning commission or part of emergency planners, these links will help provide you, access to certain, whether again, GIS layers, program information, guidance documents, and the like. Next slide. One of the other takeaways, the department put together a standing web page for, weather ready, just to have guidance documents for typical storms. Right now, it's still set up for like the summertime, tropical storms and flooding, but each of those expand and provide guidance documents, whether it's frequently asked questions, to just understand what are ways to prepare or recover from, guidance if there's some type of an issue. This page will also be, say, changed over to a specific incident. If there is a larger disaster or a storm that impacts the state, it will then become a standing page for that incident. And if there's certain disaster specific guidance that needs to be provided, then it would be added to those sections of the page. Keep going. Okay. So again, if the solid waste bar was expanded, a lot of focus is on debris management and also the temporary debris management areas. I'll cover that a little bit more later, but having those debris management plans and having the pre-approved TDMA areas, again, whether it's a small storm or a larger event that generates debris, how do you, move that around and within your jurisdiction? Next. It's not always in the land. It can be waterway. So is also guidance with the waterway debris removal. Next. Okay, getting into TDMAs, temporary debris management areas. Again, providing an area where, if you can't get it shipped to a landfill or recycle center right away, it's, too much, you need a temporary area to stage it before it can be moved out of the area. This is what a TDMA is. And basically they do need to be pre-approved before they're used, so there's an aspect of coordination that occurs in order to make sure that it's situated in the right location, has the appropriate approvals from the local jurisdiction, and separates the waste. There's a flyer for the different types of waste streams. Just again, guidance is available on the webpage there. Next slide. We also have state contracts for both land and waterway debris that are maintained. Again, that was a lesson learned from Superstorm Sandy, just to make sure that we have stuff in place, whether the state needs to use it or, county or locals. I believe in Hunterdon County, you guys have something set up in order to facilitate that, again, based on lesson learned from Isaias and Ida. Next slide. These are questions we get all the time. Every time there's an event is who has the responsibility for waterway debris? So that was a frequently asked question that was crafted through the land use program, and basically it's the property owner. So, I know, Katie had spoken about, the department regulates the waterway, but it does not own it. So, again, regulatory oversight, but as far as debris removal, it's the property owner. So the first question that always comes up is who owns the property? Identify those, so again, GIS becomes important. Understanding, what the block and lot is, what the infrastructure is in order to, come up with a game plan, if you will, for how best to deal with debris removal. Next slide. There's also guidance on repairing infrastructure. So, those emergency authorizations to kind of streamline the process in getting those culverts back in order to get the roadways set up, bridges back in place, so folks can get access to areas. Again, there's guidance there and areas and ways to go and streamline to get the work done as you guys are out in the field trying to clean up. Next slide. So we're also going to be getting into snow season, winter season. The other stuff that we push out is the department's snow removal and disposal policy. If you click the next, a lot of times it's not the first couple of snowstorms, but it's as the snow piles up, where do we put it next? We filled all the parking lots, we've sent all the stuff, but there's concerns on what's in the snow. The folks are plowing, they're pushing, but there's going to be debris, and as the snow melts, there's stuff that's left behind. So that's the aspect where from an environmental perspective, try to make sure that that's placed in an appropriate area. Next. So as far as the criteria for doing an emergency authorization, if there is a need for that, again, we make sure we send a reminder out to the emergency management folks to, hey, make sure you check the boxes first before you go and need to reach out for additional emergency authorizations to put this stuff into waterways. They basically reach out to the DEP through the hotline. It gets routed to compliance and enforcement. They'll go through the checklist and provide that authorization. Most of the times this is with like the large port authorities that don't have, have limited space for moving snow. But again, if we have a very heavy winter, which we never know if thinking of the farmer's almanac or what, if we get a heavy winter, there's always that potential. So put that in here just to, again, as a reference. Next slide. Again, just where the policy is, who to follow up if there's questions. Next slide. So again, planning. There's the document, we call it, the go-to, if you will, for emergency operations plans. It's been updated, and that's the point of reference for crafting, EOPs, if you will. So whether it's in coordination with the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, it's kind of the go-to for the emergency planners. Pulling together that, what's in your area, your jurisdiction, understanding, again, what's impacted on a regular basis. As Katie said, where are you putting the sawhorses out? What roadways are getting flooded? Who do you need to evacuate regularly? Where is there debris falling or piling up? Are there issues with wildfires on a regular basis during, those kinds of seasons? What are ways to plan for that? And then, address those areas, hazards. Again, you get into the training and exercise piece of it in order to see, if your policies and procedures for, that are contained within your emergency operations plan, help to deal with the response to that hazard. Next slide. One of the things that we've had clarification requested is the difference between an EOP and an offsite ERP. So for this slide, you have the county and municipal OEMs are required to have emergency operations plans. The basis for that is through New Jersey State Police Office of Emergency Management. There's a directive there that was updated in March. Basically, that trying to clarify between EOP and ERP with the different types of stakeholder groups, an emergency management council versus a local emergency planning committee, and what the status of the document is, whether it's confidential and is exempt from public disclosure, or under EPCRA with the offsite emergency response plans, they are required to be accessible to the general public through a reading room during normal business hours. And back in April of this year, Hunterdon County was designated a county-based emergency planning district by the State Emergency Response Commission. Initially, when the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, EPCRA, was put in place back in the 80s, New Jersey took the stance of designating every municipality as a planning district, which again is 564 at this point in time, makes it very difficult to track and manage at a state level to just, make sure everybody has their local emergency planning committee, they have their ERP, are they managing it, are they meeting, are they doing their training and exercises, are they making the plan available to the public or not. So the State Emergency Response Commission has gone and push this to the county level, and has been working on this for the past, let's say, 2 years in phases to redesignate or redistrict the emergency planning districts, if you will, from a local level to the county level. So again, just to help folks understand the difference between the confidentiality and the basis of the emergency operations plans for county and municipalities versus the EPCRA required offsite emergency response plan. And obviously there are a lot of different types of plans out there. So, we talked about the state hazard, the hazard mitigation plan. You have the debris management plans, there's, the different land use plans. So understanding where they overlap and staying coordinated with the different groups, just to deconflict where one plan might, overlap with another, I think is an important piece in staying coordinated. So that way they're, as effective as possible when there is an incident. Next slide. Here's contact information for our program. Bob is our director, so basically everything gets deferred through him. The stuff with our hotline information, we also have the Warren DEP application for non-emergency reporting, and you can reach us at any time if you have any questions or follow-up clarification needed. Thank you. If there's time, I just want to put a plug out for the anybody from OEM with the updated vulnerability assessments that Christine Schell and Kevin Preddy have been doing. This is part of a confidential update that's been done, again, for vulnerability assessments. It looks at the chemical perspective, and if there is a chemical release, how that potentially impacts the surrounding area, call it a worst case scenario, in order to understand, again, what's impacted in that zone, if you will, what needs to be isolated and evacuated, roadways, residents, sensitive receptors, which is, hospitals and schools, daycare facilities and the like. So if there's someone from, folks from OEM on here, they can request access to this. Again, it's a planning tool. So it would end up being part of the EOP. there's the contact information. There's a confidentiality agreement that gets signed, and there's access provided through the Homeland Security Information Network, HISN access. So it's a, again, secure platform where these call it documents are hosted and shared. So if there's additional information or questions that you would like, you can reach out to us. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, that is the end of our presentation. Do we have any questions that are percolating?
So there were no questions in the comment box. Anybody that wants a copy of the slide deck, they can email planning@county.hunterdon.nj.us. Or if folks want to unmute themselves, they can add to the conversation.
All right, well, thank you for everyone for attending the virtual breakfast talk. We hope everyone found it educational. We have posted the contact information for the presenters in case you have questions later. The recording of the presentation will be emailed to those who registered. And actually, we could just, since we have everyone's email to register them, we can also just email the slide deck out that way. We might want to make sure it's still, all those links of Mitzi's still work if we make it a PDF, so it doesn't clog your email, and it can actually be accepted. So it might be a day or two to get that coordinated. But we're really glad that you all could do this presentation. Thank you very much. Last call for questions.
I had a quick one. What are the 4 regions that you described, Nick? That you mentioned the Northeast one. Which are the others? And does it cover the whole state in the 4 regions, or have you identified some particular hotspots for planning?
So the 4 regions there's one, they've named themselves as NENJ. So that again was Newark, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Bayonne. There's a region on the Raritan River, the Bayshore. Another for the 6 local governments on Long Beach Island, and then a 4th around Atlantic City, kind of in Absecon Island and some of the Back Bay communities. They self-selected as regions through a funding opportunity multiple years ago at this point. And so we don't have, certainly does not cover the majority of the state, let alone the majority of the kind of the counties where we could do the work with the federal funding. So lots more to be done, and that's kind of why we're always kind of scrounging for every dollar we can here to provide those resources to our towns. You can look at those regions and the plans at resilient.nj.gov.
Got it. So for Hunterdon folks, for example, county and municipalities, we can just look at some of the other things you talked about today. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. And I'll note that the announcement that should be coming out in early 2024, Hunterdon County would be eligible to apply for that funding.
Great. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for the presentation, everyone.
Thanks all.
And if I may just add one quick note that increasingly with our grant opportunities, we are trying to make sure that we are rewarding folks who have gone through some planning efforts, whether that's watershed restoration plans or Resilient NJ. We're really trying to highlight that planning pays.
All right, no other questions, then we might be done with this session. Actually, per Katie's comment, I will point out that we are working toward, the county is updating its growth management plan, and we have included a section on climate or hazard, environmental hazard as well. So resiliency. So it's on the county website, and that section we're hoping that section can be helpful to municipalities as well when they are crafting their own resiliency planning. So.
And I would certainly note any planning that you've done in any grant application to any of us.
Good.
Good.
All right. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you at a future breakfast talk or just around the county. Thanks.